Amit here, and I'm here to explain to you in another tough game. Really, this guy, although I am again a winner at the last 26th second, and he ran out of time. And it was really bad game for me. I could have won it, but the time was up in a blitz match, and I won by time advantage of 26 seconds ahead of him, and his time was up. But even though I had time, I could have won by piece domination. I could tell you how to dominate him throughout this game. This guy is actually an expert. Actually, after being beaten by him for 3 times, I managed to beat him instead. I would show you the submission moves. So the first move goes by e4 and e5, the famous Vishwanathan Anand's opening, and then comes here the tricky attack to pawn f4, which means that if I strike him, he could just move this pawn and then come with striking this bishop. And so I strike him, not giving further room, otherwise he would progress forward and occupy my arena over here with the pawn backup. So then I strike him and he comes back with a reinforcement of knight, and then I come make my knight move forward, and then bishop c4, so that he can bring his knight and attack my pawn over here in f7 and give a forking attack to my queen and rook in d8 and h8. So with the bishop backup on c4. So now what I need to do is take a countermeasure on that. He can't come this way obviously because my knight is here, and if he comes this way I have to move my pawn ahead, step ahead, which I do. Then what he does is do the castling, and he's pretty fast now because I am 3 steps behind for him to castle. So you can see how quickly he has managed to bring 2 pieces out and doing the castling at the same time and disturbing my pawn structure. So this is how experienced this guy is, and I have just managed to start over the game after his moves. So he's almost 3 moves ahead of me, and he disturbs my bishop again. I move back, and then he comes with bishop at f4 to attack my pawn with another knight, possibly a potential threat a few steps afterwards, to which I reply by blocking him. And again, at this point of time, if you see, uh, there is a pretty dangerous move here. If you see at this lineup, only experts actually get to have this lineup against a competitive player like me, of course. I'm not boasting of myself, but I'm saying I have done all possible ways to prevent him from infiltrating into my arena, which is after row 5, being a black. And his arena is up to row 4, and he has already occupied almost like 6 squares. 1 2 3 4 5 6, and a double pressure point on here and here. So this square e5, which is the king's pawn, has been compromised heavily with the queen backup and rook reinforcement, and this knight and the pawn and the bishop. So I need to at least have some form of retaliation to it by having my knight placed over here for e5, and having my pawn moved forward. So it is all a game of capturing the square of e5, actually, this particular square, who can reach there to attack my king, and he has played that pretty well. I need to avoid the further infiltration and achieve castling as soon as possible. So I move, he moves back to give my bishop a threat, a discovered attack, to which I bring my knight forward. I don't actually move my knight here because he could move his pawn and give me a threat, so I move a step way back ahead, so that even if he progresses forward or even plans an attack like that, I would take him out by this pawn. And if he takes me back, then I would compromise his queen and cancel out the queen and make the game simpler, because queen is a very big variable. So he wants to keep the queen, so that he wants to play a strategy against me. As you know, he is a very good strategist at this point, so he doesn't want to sacrifice his queen, so he wouldn't actually attack my knight if I move here instead of here. That's all the theory behind these movements. And then he comes striking at this point to my king. This is probably a sacrificial move, a dangerous one, compromising my castling even before I could castle. So I would go for a compromised castle, moving him, taking him out, and then he comes back giving me a check, to which I respond by moving back, not by killing him, because if I would do that, even again I could not do, because it's a double check, because it's discovered check by the rook also. The rook was behind it and he came with a check in the knight and the rook as well. Double check, this is called double check. And so he did not, he did not pronounce it as a check. He just needs to stay check. Whether it's check by horse or whether it's check by rook, it is up to you to decipher. So at all costs, this is the most powerful check which you cannot avoid by a blockage. You have to move back, and you cannot strike the opponent because that is a double check, and you cannot cancel out the check. So the king is forced. You see how this guy is doing things. He's really good, but I'm going to take this as an advantage even under pressure. I'm going to teach you how to take an advantage of this situation even on a double check. What you do is you don't move here, otherwise you will be casted out, and this rook here will divide the board into two portions where your king will be stuck at this point, and you will be applied pressure points by this knight, and the queen would drop here, and then the next move they will checkmate you by moving here, and the knight is already here. See how intelligent he is. If I just made one wrong move by moving here, and if he brings his queen here, I have to force my bishop to move here to avoid the queen to come and put a checkmate on me here. So because I would be here and I cannot move here because of the knight, so I have to place my bishop here. To avoid to do all that, I simply move here back, so that even if he comes here and gives me a check, I could still move this side and have an option of bishop. I'm increasing my options here. So you see how complex it is. By definition, by this player is actually really good strategist in that. So I'm pretty fast enough to realize all these things, 26 seconds ahead of him, as you can see how I won this game. But I'm going to explain it to you how. So he comes and gives me a double fork attack on a rook and a queen. I have to sacrifice my rook and move my queen further here to avoid the attack on the queen, and then he takes out my rook. So then I take out his knight, and then he is now moving another pawn forward to make a pawn structure and also evacuate the position to move other pieces, to which I respond by making my queen available here, so that I am the now who is formulating a strategy by bringing the bishop in the next move here on h3, so that even if he strikes me, he cannot, because the king would be discovered a check from the queen at g6. So he basically what he does is tries to avoid that attack by a checkmate by queen capturing this square. Now I have put a pressure on him to dance to my tunes, because I am putting a pressure on g2, the column G and the row 2. I'm putting a pressure on here with my queen and my possible attack from the bishop. So he is cancelling out my strategy by bringing the queen to put a pressure on g2, to which I respond anyway, because I'm not going to strike him though, but I'm not going to let him take my bishop as well, but just keep my bishop there to put a pressure on him. And he keeps moving, because he knows that I cannot strike him a checkmate since his queen is here. And I'm just trying to work my way out on that by moving this pawn forward. As you can see, if he strikes me, I can go and strike his queen and then checkmate him, so that I'm putting a pressure on his pawn over here in the middle. But he comes forward and gives a threat to my bishop, and then I give a threat to him in turn using my bishop, to which he comes back again, gives a threat, to which I reply by striking the pawn. Now at this point of time, I'm clearing my way out so that he comes and strikes me back, even though now he cannot strike because I am having my queen. And the reason why I stuck this pawn is because if I strike him, he would not place his rook in the middle of the way, otherwise the queen will be caught in the line of fire and his rook will be stuck here forever, and he should waste another move to clear out his queen and then move his rook out of my queen's way. So he would first strike using this one, and then I can bring my bishop and give a threat to the queen instead. That's the reason why I stuck this pawn with my pawn. And so it happened, and then I threatened the queen in turn, and then the queen has to move out of the way. Now I forced him in a certain way to having this position, but it is still tricky because he has a reinforced board partition by this. He has split the board into two halves and worked this trick against me, where this rook is splitting the half as a monster. It's dangerous little devil here, splitting the board into two major halves, and with my king restrained to just three squares here, g8, h8, and h7, which is really risky here for me, and my king can move only in between these four squares now because of these two assets here. So I need to cancel out the threat, so I may bring my rook here at f8. He's still putting pressure on my bishop at f5, using his queen and his rook, and he can move another rook here to put further pressure down the line at f5 on my bishop, to which I have three assets to protect my bishop, which is the knight at e7, queen at g6, and rook at f8, to protect this bishop, to safeguard this bishop. Now, why this bishop is extremely important? He wants to take this bishop out at all cost, because I am a threat to his king, but his king is far better positioned than mine actually, with the proper defense structure and a well good advancement of structured pawn, which I don't have actually. I envy him. But anyways, I need to formulate a strategy. As I expected, he came here and I needed to move my pawn here, so the knight here, so that I can move my knight to the next square here and give a threat to his rook, to which he replies by bringing his knight and giving my bishop with rook, which I don't care, because my bishop here is serving a purpose of a diagonal threat to his king, but he has reinforced it with his bishop and his pawn, which is blocking away my bishop, and further to that he is now taking out the threat by bringing the knight in, and he is going to cancel out, to which I respond anyways by advancing further to threaten his rook. Now he can't strike my knight, he has to protect his rook because his rook is way stronger than the knight, to which he responds anyways by giving a threat to my queen instead, which is really clever. He comes and jumps in here. Now I am forced to move my queen. Now just imagine if I move my queen here to keep my reinforcement on this f5 square for the bishop, he would kill me with the knight. And if I move here again anyways to keep my reinforcement on the knight as a safeguard, the knight on the bishop as a safeguard, that his knight would still move on d7 here, and then give a fork attack to my queen and my rook. So I had to be pretty fast enough to think about all these things in just 5 minutes and then formulate strategy. This is why sometimes you should not think too much actually. If you think too much, you cannot work it out. So this is the reason why you have to always use intuition, a guided intuition out of your skilled experience, to instantly detect the best possible move in a couple of seconds, just like that. So to which I just respond by moving backwards here. Now I have maintained my position to back up my bishop with my queen, my rook, and the horse intact without losing any backup. He has three assets to strike my bishop, and I still have three assets, including the queen, avoiding the knight's threat, and along with my knight and the rook over here, and avoided the knight's possible forking as well. So this is really hard if you play a blitz match to determine the possible combinations and then quickly make that move. And as you can see, it's just a 5 minutes match and I'm still able to do that. So now he responds to that by, he realizes that it is now useless against these attacks, so I'm really clever enough to avoid his threats. So he comes back here to give a threat to my king's pawn here at g7, putting a pressure on that, to which I respond by killing his rook, which he couldn't avoid actually. So he takes my knight using his rook, not using his bishop, because he wants to keep a pressure on this column and keep my king restrained in this particular column on h. So now my king is actually really restricted, and the only way to protect my king is this pawn. Otherwise my king would be restricted only in this column, and compared to his king, he can move anywhere he wants here. So that's how seasoned this guy is, actually really experienced. I really admire him. But anyways, after losing 3 games against him, I have won this one. I will show you how. So what I have done here is move this pawn forward again from here to here, so that I can bring my bishop and pin down all the 3 assets of him. At least one would be compromised, and his horse would be locked in here, and he would have to make this rook recede back fall back in line just to make sure that he avoids my bishop, and then he has to waste another move by moving the queen out of the way. So this is a really dangerous move here to move this pawn here, to which he responds by attacking my bishop, and he quickly realizes that, to which I respond by moving my rook here and saving that rook out of the attack, because what I preferred is not losing many pieces at this point of time, which is really important. So for me, um, not losing the rook was more important than actually formulating an attack in the diagonal position for the rook and the queen. So what I did was protected my rook instead and kept my stand here against the king, and let the knight take on my bishop on b6. Then I take pawn takes knight at b6. So then he moves forward, advances further. These two pawns are always two little pricks, which I call them the king's duo, who, when advanced towards your king with reinforced uh, uh, backup as a safeguard here, as a defense and offense at the same time, it's really dangerous when they advance. So you have to take a countermeasure by giving a threat with any of their assets now itself. So I move my knight here over at d5 to give a threat to his rook at f4. So then he responds by moving back, and I have now gained the control of pushing him away from behind. So then, so I move forward by losing the defense on the bishop, since my queen is already here, and I want to attack his bishop instead. They have been troubling my bishop since a long time now. Now I need to trouble their bishop using my rook and my knight. So he will be forced now to protect his bishop, because these bishops are really dangerous for the king. So now he recedes back, way back, but still the purpose is still not defeated, because he's still on the attack, and which to which I can reply by moving pawn a little further to avoid his further advancements, to which he brings his queen. It's a really dangerous move here to bring his queen over here, but I was prepared for that anyways. He can't take my pawn. It's just a check, and I can move forward and keep going. He can't do anything about me. Now my king is all taken care of and protected extremely well. So he takes out my bishop, knowing that he needs to break my concrete, and now he has sacrificed his rook, knowing that he can't break my impenetrable defense actually, even after his reinforced concrete positions, where he had aligned things like these in the past, where he had all this triple reinforced alignment here to break my king's column here in the F, and then keep my king restrained in this position. From here on, how to take him down to this position is actually a play of a strategy, where I had made further advancements and forced him to sacrifice his rook, finally giving up on my reinforcement against his counter. So finally I take him over, and here you can see, due to this position way back, if you remember, at here what he had done is he had compromised a bishop by attacking my pawn here, and I had taken him out, and he had given me a double check at this point, to which I responded by a guided castling, which is actually something towards the corner. At the same time, it's not actually cornered. It is something to avoid a possible checkmate by this queen moving further inside and using the horse to block the square at d7. So when he did that in a planning to do all these maneuvers, he tried on me. He had lost this bishop in this pursuit, which led in fact to this game end in a certain way that I have gained a piece over him, in a way that both his rooks are lost, and in a pursuit of breaking my concrete reinforcement against his reinforced attack on my king, minor half of the board, on this position of the board. And as you can see here, it was a very big reinforced planned partition on the board to keep my king restrained in this particular minor half of the board, to which I had again put my resistance as I explained it to you. I don't need to go back at it again step by step, so you can just rewind it and see, look at it. So this position is pretty complex actually. The most the crucial part of this game is right here, because it all that sacrifice of that particular bishop which I was talking about a while back, which led to the double check, had led to this particular winning strategy arrangement, to which I had to build up a concrete counter, so that his sacrifice back then of the bishop, of the white bishop, which led to just having one bishop for the pawn he took from me, the bishop which he lost, if I successfully counter his reinforcement attack, then he would end up having a piece lesser than me. And that's how it ended up in a way that I explained a while back, that it ended up in a way that all the moves that I had explained, it ended up in a way in this format where my reinforcement was, my safeguard measures were very concrete against his, my counter measures were very concrete against his reinforced attacks actually. So now he had tried to sacrifice his rook. Now he doesn't have both of his rook, yet I have my rook intact, and a horse I have gained over his pieces. So I have two pieces apart from queen, and he has just one piece apart from queen. Now he is outmatched actually. At the same time, even though if he tries a last one check, I just avoid it very easily, and his time is up actually. He couldn't think further. So if you ask me, at this point of time, he lost by uh, uh, having used up all his time actually. He just lost by time. But then, if even if he would have continued to play further, the possible moves would have been to cancel out the pieces and then take over a long, it's a longer game even than this. It's because it was a blitz game, it ended now, but otherwise there were over 2 dozen moves still remaining, because there are so many pieces on the board and you can see many pieces to just move around, and there are pawns actually. It becomes ultimately a pawns game with just one piece ahead of him, because he's really a structured player. I would have forced him to defeat by cancelling out the pieces. Like for example, his queen is here, and the next move, after avoiding his check, he would have formulated a strategy by moving his pawn further, taking any of his pawn, putting pressure on my pawns, and instead I would have replied by moving my pawn over here and luring the bishop into attacking my pawn, having a queen reinforced behind him, to which I would have responded by anyways taking him out, so that even if he strikes my knight after taking my pawn, even if I lose both my pawn and my knight for one bishop, he would be left with just one queen. But I would be having both my queen and my rook. So most probably the possible moves after this was either he would have taken his queen to a position where he can strike my king, but at this point of time it seems as if it's useless, because he would just move again here for a check, to which I would have responded by moving here, and he would have moved back here, and I would have moved then to this square in f7, to which he could not have given any check at all. So he would have not done that check trick again, having tried it once on me earlier. So he would have gone for this pawn movements, to which I would have responded by luring him into an attack with my pawn, so that the bishop comes and takes it, thinking that I would not hit because he's having a queen behind him. To which I would have responded by actually hitting him and taking out the bishop at the cost of my pawn, just to make sure that he's left only with one queen, and at this position at f4, so that immediately I would have, since the pawn is not blocking my queen's way and my rook is free to move, the immediate move will be disastrous. On the sacrifice of just one pawn, I would gain an access to barge into his court of the king and then spoil his castling protection. And otherwise I would just not use this rook first, I would make the queen move faster, because queens are even more powerful, they can do more damage actually. I will show you how. If he moves this, for instance this pawn, if I move this pawn forward, it takes me, and knight takes the bishop at f4, and the queen takes the knight at f4. After that, I would be free to move here, and I would go straightly give a check to the king, and the king would move here somewhere, and it will be awkward for the king now, no, to avoid attacking me, to avoid me from attacking the pawn over here after giving a check, because his queen is over here, and I could still attack this pawn if it was here, or I could take this pawn if it was here. Any of that I could take, and serially I could have killed all these pawns, because my knight is over here backed up by this pawn, and further to that I have my reinforced rook here to split the board into half, and along with my king to protect him. So the king should not be left alone, so the rook is near the king, and the knight is safe here with the pawns actually, and this pawn is protected by the rook. So from here to here I have protected my knight, and the knight is suitably stationed here to have a second reinforced attack on this pawn at c3 later, when if I move my queen here and started attacking taking out all the pawns here, he could literally do nothing about it actually. So which would end up and having a game where he has lesser number of pawns, and maybe he would try to cancel out the queen's exchange for one kill for another, and he could take out my queen using giving a checkmate near his king, and he could the queens would cancel out, and having this knight and bishop gone, this rook would be still remaining as the last asset to the king in the game, with a few more soldiers to hustle around. So anyways, I would have used this king to promote my soldier forward to a queen, and then checkmated the king eventually. That's how long this game still was. You can imagine the number of moves required to end this game actually. This guy was really so smart and such a brilliant guy. It took really almost 4 games to beat him just once. He was requesting a new game, but I couldn't actually. Really, it was exhausting to even think of these things. Actually, just that 5 minutes, you see, it's just like sitting on an oven, and it feels like 1 hour actually of painful thinking and formulating those strategies and triangulating those attacks to have made this through so far. This game was the most difficult game that I have played today. Actually, it's really a learning for me of I'm going to record all this so that I don't forget all these things, and also at the same time I need you to also understand the mechanics behind this arrangement of the pieces and this formulation of the strategies. Actually, it's really helpful to learn an advanced level like this actually. Anyways, I won, and Mr. Mayo lost it. Goodbye. Thank you.